These are the people trapped in the city of Mosul, fighting for survival. It's been several weeks since Iraqi forces and an international coalition launched the operation to retake Daesh's last major stronghold in Iraq. They have made gains on several fronts. But Daesh has still refused to surrender. The army has had to dodge car bombs, sniper fire, and ambushes launched from a network of Daesh tunnels.
تقريبا ماكو امين نروح نضل هنا ماكو. والله خاف ليش ما قلت ما خاف تخوف شويه هاونات تقع خاف طلقات عندنا اطفال يخافون بالليل يبكون.
And the presence of more than 1 million civilians throughout the city has posed challenges, reducing their options for using airstrikes and heavy weapons in densely populated streets. Daesh still occupies 3/4 of Mosul, depriving residents of electricity, food, and water, and shooting anyone that tries to escape. But for those who have, their new reality isn't much brighter. The United Nations says close to 84,000 displaced people are being housed in camps near eastern Mosul. But they're running out of room for new arrivals and are desperate for aid. Over the past year, Iraqi troops and allied forces have pushed Daesh from most of the vast Sunni province of Anbar west of Baghdad and areas north and east of the Iraqi capital. But the humanitarian fallout has been dire. On top of Mosul's crisis, Iraq is already dealing with 3.1 million internally displaced people since the campaign against the militant group began in 2014. The summer battle to force Daesh from the city of Fallujah forced more than 60,000 people out in just 3 days. Overwhelming aid workers who raced against the clock to prepare additional camps to prevent overcrowding. And as winter sets in across northern Iraq, aid agencies worry that funding isn't coming in fast enough to keep up. The UN's refugee agency says it needs $584 million this year to deal with the influx of internally displaced people. But so far, it has only received $249 million, or 43% of that, of which $196 million is needed just for the Mosul emergency response. As relief agencies continue to be stretched to their limit. The UN says it is now preparing for a potential exodus of 700,000 people from Mosul. And with the threat of violence spilling into neighboring areas, a dark question overshadows the plight of Iraq's displaced residents. Where will they flee to next? Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now is the head of the UNHCR in Iraq, Bruno Geddo. Thanks so much for joining us, sir. There are reports that if Mosul is retaken, up to 700,000 people will be displaced. Does that sound reasonable to you? Does that sound like a correct ballpark figure?
That is our own planning figure. The planning figure of the United Nations for Mosul is, in the worst case scenario, 700,000 people. The issue is, how are we going to meet this need for shelter? And it is here that the nuances have to be made. The first one is that the maximum capacity we have between now and March next year will be something like 30,000 plots multiplied by 6 is 180,000 people. We can increase this capacity up to 75,000 plots, that is multiplied by 6, 470,000 people. But still we will not be able to meet the figure of 700,000. How then can the water find its level? There are two possibilities here. One is that the people who have already come out from the city, as their neighborhoods are being declared safe for return, are starting to return. Second, and most important, there is an institution in Iraq called sponsorship, meaning that displaced people from Mosul can be sponsored by relatives, by tribesmen, by entrepreneurs, to move elsewhere in the country, to join family members, or to move to a religious shrine, or to move to a farm to pick fruit. And therefore, if they are allowed to be sponsored out of the camps, additional spare capacity will be created, and therefore we could accommodate the fresh outflow. The challenge is that we don't know when, and that is why we need to prepare more camps to be ready to receive more people. The situation is going into a long-term siege. We don't know when the cork will pop, but when the cork pops, we may be overwhelmed if we are not prepared to receive a much bigger number of people.
In an earlier interview, you said that you don't want to have the same situation as Fallujah. That's why you want to be prepared. It made me curious. How do you feel you failed when it came to Fallujah?
We failed because we didn't see the cork popping. In Fallujah, there was pent-up pressure to free, but ISIS was able to keep people inside the city. They were being executed, fired at if they were trying to flee. All of a sudden, a military position was taken off, and an opening was made, and there was a mass outflow, 65,000 people in 3 days. Result, the UN was not prepared to receive them, and some of them went for many days without shelter, which for a humanitarian worker is very bad, and we felt very bad about this. We are determined not to repeat the same mistake. Donors are helping us because donors now are funding us to prepare. In the case of Fallujah, we had no funds to prepare. We had to use all the money that was at our disposal, but that was not enough to set up all the camps necessary to receive these people. The challenge here is that Mosul is likely to be as much as 10 times bigger than Fallujah. So it will still be a major issue for us to be able to respond, even as we are trying our best to prepare, and we have some funds to do so.
If the cork pops, as you say, right now, do you have enough money to deal with the situation and the people who will be scattered as a result?
We have 40,000 tents available. That is not a small figure. Each tent can house 6 people, so it would make for 240,000 people, 160,000 people, sorry. But then there are the tents also put at the disposal by the Ministry of Migration. So the capacity in terms of tents is available. The issue is that we do not have enough land to put the tents on.
Final question for you, sir. What would you deem success? If we spoke again in a month's time, what would be deemed success in your eyes?
I mean, to me, the success I'm looking for, in the short term, of course, if there is a large-scale outflow, the success will be if we manage to provide shelter, food and water within 24 hours of arrival. That is the first line of response, life-saving assistance. But the longer-term success, we need to make sure that civilians feel protected and respected. This, hopefully, will help counter the narrative of ISIS that out there are your enemies, and give a perspective to those who lived and suffered in Mosul for the last 2 years, that at the end of the day, they may have a place in the future Iraqi polity.
Bruno Geddo, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us.